Hello, hello. It's April 17th, 2024. This is Neil, and I'm going to talk about issue number 72, which is an experiment that I'm doing because I want to understand how fetch works when you put to an endpoint that returns a redirect. Now, from what I've read, if you put to a URL that then returns a 307, and that's temporarily moved, then the put is supposed to be redirected to that new endpoint. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing that behavior. So I wanted to run this out in three different environments. I have Cloud Shell, I have production, and I have localhost, which I just got working. And you can see from each of these that I'm logged in. Cloud Shell has some more cookies because you have to be logged into Cloud Shell for the web proxy to work. So three different ways of running this thing: naked in the case of localhost, and through a proxy in the case of Cloud Shell, and then directly to the production server with the production proxy in the way for Cloud Run. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this video ID, I'm logged in as myself, and I'm going to try to do a put, and this won't be cross origin, so it won't be a CORS, because I'm going directly against the server that I'm running the test VHTML on. So we're just going to call it test webm, and I'm going to pick the bigger file because I want to go over what's allowed by Cloud Shell. And then one more thing to mention, you can now specify the max payload that's checked for, and this is really so that Cloud Shell and localhost have a similar surface as production Cloud Run, because I found that with the max payload, when you do a put, it actually goes to the Google front end server first before your actual middleware server, your Go server, and it will absorb the entire put body as a payload. And if the payload is bigger than the 32 megabyte limit, then it just bounces you and you don't even see anything in cloud logs. And so we don't have the exact functionality on localhost and Cloud Shell, but this simulates it. And this also just gives a limit so that production isn't handling, we don't process puts directly to the API server that are bigger than max payload, which is set to 10 megabytes by default. The second thing is you can set a redirect option when you do a put against an object. So this is probably needs to be renamed because it doesn't actually redirect, and it's not always a response for a get. But this is how we process a request against a direct asset. And there's a redirect parameter you can specify. And what we're going to do is set it to always, because when it's on auto mode, then it redirects only if the file size is bigger than a threshold, and the threshold defaults. We just have it set to 1 megabyte right now. And while we're not dealing with, we're going to deal with some small files, but really, yeah, let's try this with max is 0, which means we'll accept anything without bouncing it, and we're going to set redirect equals always. And I'm going to set this on all of these guys. And we're going to do the same thing on all of them. It's a 37.5 megabyte file. We'll start with localhost. I'll come back to each of these. So this is what I'm seeing in Cloud Shell. This is where I was just testing. In my server, it says connection reset, but my server is returning something. I think this might have something to do with chunked encoding, but when I stepped through the code, it did appear that it was simply writing stuff out. So it's almost, it's kind of funny. We can take a look at that in a moment. This is really what I want to test out. Cloud Shell does this through the web proxy, which is funky. Production just bounces you because the file is too large. And localhost, oh, this is great. Signed URL error. So we weren't even able to generate the URL in localhost. Oh boy. Okay, that's something I'm going to have to take a look at. So I'm going to have to avoid localhost right now. I'm guessing my credentials aren't set up so that I can sign URLs because I haven't tested localhost much. So we're just going to skip that one. We're going to go to a smaller file now, so it's no longer constrained by the 32 megabyte limit of Cloud Shell. I'm going to try the same thing. This is kind of more what I expect. So it goes to do a put. This is something I've been running into everywhere with cores. And the put responds with, okay, we know who you are. We've checked your authentication. And so we're going to give you a location where you can store that file. That's the idea. And then it obeys and says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a put against that URL. Now, in this case, the cookies don't get passed, and I don't think we can see that in here. Yeah, the request headers, there's no cookies being passed in, and it's not showing me did an options against it, which is funky. CORS error. It's not even telling me what it's doing. Access control allow credentials header is blank, which must be true. Let's go ahead and look at this. Yeah, it's passing it to the redirect in this case, but it's trying to pass credentials, but there's no credentials there. Okay, now we can kind of see why this isn't working. There's no cookie for that. Credentials is cookie. There's no cookie for that domain that has my authentication, and there doesn't need to be because it's a signed URL, but it's trying to pass that in, and the CORS headers from the signed URL doesn't include that header because it doesn't support cookies. So I'll have to try out doing a fetch where I'm specifying the authorization header and see if that authorization header causes problems. And instead of doing credentials include, just do it directly. I wonder if this is why this is failing. So let's try the same smaller one. Same thing, connection reset. But if you look, let's take a look at what's going on here. I know for a fact it's getting to this point. So let's go ahead and watch it get to that point. Okay, make me a liar. It's not getting to that point this time. Oh, I'm doing always redirect. That's an auto. Always this redirect. Okay, so we're going to issue a 307, give back the signed URL. Let's watch what happens. So parsed that. It's going to set the location to my thing. It's going to write the code 307, and then it exits. I want to look at this too. And that's it. Oh, you know what? I wonder if it's not writing the body. Could that be part of what's messing it up? Like it just wrote the status code, which also should write the headers. So let's take a look in more detail about what's happening there. If we wrote the header, okay, check write header code. It didn't do anything. Did I miss something? Hmm. Yeah, because if you do a redirect and it's a get, then it writes this body type. It just writes some crappy HTML. But in this case, we're not writing anything to the body. Kind of want to see what happens if we do write something to the body. Write byte blank. Like what happens there? Okay. Ah, look at that. So in this case, we did get something back. We got back the value of production. Ah, okay, we solved. Interesting. So if you do a redirect and you're on Cloud Shell, it doesn't actually send any data over. So when it closes the connection, the web proxy shuts off the connection violently and we get that error. Okay. Debugging, helpful. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try modifying vHTML so you can pass in a header instead of using cookies and see if that works. And the second thing that I'm going to do is get signed URLs working on my local implementation.